All right. It looks like it is now 5:30. I'm hoping I can be heard here. I'd like to call to order the virtual meeting of the regular Learning and Teaching Committee, Monday, July 20th, 2020 for District 303, and the time is 5:30. We can start with citizen comments. It sounds like we have a few of them.
Yes, give me a moment to share my screen and I'll play citizen comments.
All right, thank you.
Yes, my name is Heather Austin, and I have an incoming kindergartner, and I just want to express some very real concerns about a 2-hour and 15-minute school day for the kindergartners. Understand that there are safety protocols that you need to reduce the number of kids in the building, but as a parent, I have grave concerns that my daughter will not be ready for first grade next year. With only 45 minutes of literacy and 45 minutes of math, and then a short break. You know, having had a previous kindergartner full day, I don't see how this is going to prepare her. It's disrupting her in the middle of the day, and you know, there are obviously other concerns about busing and getting, you know, paying for aftercare and all those sorts of things. But really just the preparedness and really a full schedule, and this is even abbreviated from the previous half-day kindergarten. So I would like to hear tonight that this be addressed, and how are we going to get our kids ready that are entering kindergarten this year? How are we going to make sure that when they start school next year, they're not so far behind the other kids who went to Kensington or went to St. Patrick's or St. Peter's and did full-day kindergarten? I would really appreciate just a little bit more rationale and understanding behind this decision, and what we can do as parents to ensure that our kids that are forced into half-day kindergarten, you know, what can we do to make sure that they are not so far behind for the following school year when they're entering first grade? Thank you. Appreciate your time. Take care.
Hello, my name is Paul Woods. I have 3 elementary age students in District 303. I am dissatisfied with the amount of detail that has been provided about the plans for e-learning. I have made specific requests for additional information and included the comparisons to other districts that have already provided much more detail that is helpful for parents to be able to make decisions about whether they should go in person versus opting for e-learning from the beginning. This is a significant decision, as I know everybody's taking this seriously. However, the total lack of detail about what a day in the life of an e-learning parent and student would look like is something that doesn't give us the information that we need. My understanding is that you're planning on publishing additional information tomorrow. I'm looking forward to reviewing that, as again, the information that has been provided up to this point has been totally inadequate. We need details about, you know, what the level of instruction is going to be, not just a high-level statement that says we're going to try to make it rigorous, but rather specific details. You know, how many students will be in each class with each teacher, how much access there will be, what the structure of the day would look like, what sorts of differences specifically there will be from how things happen when they were put together ad hoc in the spring. In addition, I'd like to know if a student starts in person and then the parents opt to take them out, will that student continue e-learning somehow with their in-person class, or will they be switched over to the district-wide e-learning group? Additionally, if the state orders that e-learning is to be implemented everywhere, after we've already started in person, perhaps if cases spike, then what would the plan be in that case? Will students continue with their same groups, or would everybody be put into the same district-wide pool and shuffled around? Just curious how that would look like, if that is something that has even been discussed yet. Additionally, during the last meeting, there were very specific questions asked about what are the district protocols for when somebody gets sick. And the answers, to be honest, were very, very non-specific. So specifically, if a student or a teacher is diagnosed with COVID-19 in a classroom, Is that entire classroom quarantined? Is it only that student? What about the students that were, sitting closest to that student? You talk about contact tracing, but you didn't talk about what that actually means. And additionally, what happens when multiple students in a given classroom test positive? What are the protocols in that case? And further, the same thing, what are the thresholds when you start seeing spikes of increasing numbers of people testing positive within a given school? What are the protocols? And I think it's very important for the district to communicate what those are, and to also to convey that you actually do have a plan, because this is not the type of thing that we should be trying to figure out as it's happening. We shouldn't be changing our plans in real time. There should be very specific criteria that the district can rely upon when people are scared, when people are upset, so that you've already done the thinking before you need to make that decision. That is all. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Hernandez. I am actually calling for my son. He is going to go into 4th grade, and I am actually calling to find out, how are you guys going to be doing reading, guided reading, and how are you guys going to be doing with the bilingual program? And I do know that at Richmond, teachers, they move from one classroom to another one, the 4th grader teachers. So I was wondering if they are going to be moving too.
That's all we got from that one. That concludes citizen comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, as we have been doing with every meeting, committee meetings included, we have a superintendent update. So Dr. Pearson can certainly give us updates on some of the, well, whatever is changing, and it appears to be changing day to day.
Before you move on, do we need to take attendance?
I don't think we've ever done it by roll
No,
call.
okay,
We don't
No.
normally for committees.
okay. And I have another question before you go into it. Will somebody be responding to the people who've made comments tonight?
Typically, we don't respond, obviously, that night,
Right.
but we do have a system in place where someone from the district will address the concerns of the people, depending on what the concern is, which administrator would be responding to that individual.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Not a problem at all.
As long as we're talking about attendance, I do want to say Mrs. Weibel is not present tonight for health reasons. She asked that we let everyone know.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I have not heard from anyone else, so and I haven't scrolled through to see who all is here. I'm trusting Mrs. Ratchford to do that. Okay. So again, next up is superintendent updates. So Dr. Pearson, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. McNally and board members. Tonight, I'd like to just update you a little bit on some of the things that are going on in the district as we navigate this changing landscape of planning for school in the fall. We continue to appreciate everyone's patience as we work on a communication plan to make sure people have the information that they need to make decisions about their children's learning and what modality or what mode of learning they would like to select for the beginning of the school year. I would like to first just comment that so far in the last week, since July the 13th, we've actually received 690 dialogues in Let's Talk. And we are working through responding to all of those. We appreciate members of our community using Let's Talk to engage with district staff members. One of the things and one of the benefits of that system is that it routes your question to the appropriate person to respond. And so it's helpful for us to make sure that we get you to the right person for an answer, but it also helps us keep track of the questions that we're getting so that we have a record of those and we have information about those questions and we can use those for our planning purposes as well. As you know, last week we asked families to go in and begin to make choices for either in-person learning, which is hybrid blended at the middle school and high school, or every day at the elementary and pre-K, early childhood level. And so far, we've had about 7,000 of our 12,000 families respond. So approximately 58% of our community has responded to that survey. It is open until Friday. We know that many families are waiting for additional information, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Out of those that have responded so far, about 85% of those are looking for in-person learning. And about 14%, or right at 1,000 students, are looking for remote learning, as well as there are a few families that are letting us know that they're not coming back to school. I just want to reemphasize for families that this is really important information for us as we plan. We will be creating schedules and assigning staff based on the mode that you select. In addition, it's helpful as we plan our transportation routes to ensure social distancing to the greatest extent possible as we plan for transportation as well. So we're looking forward to having that information, and hopefully after tomorrow, when you have the rest of the guide to reopen schools with information about our instructional models, and there's greater detail there that I think many people are looking for, and hopefully that will help you as you think about and make your decisions. So that brings me to the next point. We do have our guide to reopen schools that is going to be published on the district website tomorrow, and we'll send out information to families via parent link about that. Currently, it's about a 29-page document that outlines the instructional models for the fall, the differences between in-person and remote learning, as well as the similarities. It talks about the differences between asynchronous and synchronous instruction. It also provides additional information on contact tracing and what happens when a student tests positive or a staff member tests positive. And so there's information in there. As we've mentioned previously, we plan to continue to update that information as new information becomes available. I'd like to speak just a little bit about just the health care portion. I know that people continue to ask about what happens when there's a positive case. And I think that you know that as a school district, we are in partnership with the Kane County Health Department, and we are currently involved in reporting those cases to the health department. And as we report a case, they help us work through and problem solve around who needs to be notified and what kind of the process needs to be as far as exclusion or inclusion is concerned. I can tell you that today, the nurses in Kane County school districts met with representatives of the Kane County Health Department, and those guidelines are continuing to change. And so although we have information today about what that looks like, a month from now when we are in school, I anticipate that they will continue to change based on the latest information that we have on the response to the virus across our community and state. And so I understand that people want to know exactly what's going to happen in every situation, but please also know that those situations are different. Where has that student been? Who have they been in contact with? How far or close to students in our buildings have they been? Were they on a school bus with other students? When did they test positive? All of those things are factors that have to go into the decision-making model, which is one of the reasons why we ensure that we work with the Kane County Health Department in making those decisions. So our nurses are engaged in conversations. They are putting together decision trees and protocols, and we do expect that that will be in place as we start school in the fall as well. So that's the information that I have to share with you today. Again, hopefully when we have the Guide to Reopen Schools published tomorrow, that will provide the information that families need to go ahead and help us by selecting a mode of instruction for the fall so that we can move forward with our planning. We look forward to seeing everybody, no matter what mode you choose, and we want to make sure that we are as prepared and ready as we possibly can be to support your learning, and that will help us in that effort. Thank you.
Dr. Pearson, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
You mentioned that our well, Kane County School District nurses met with the Kane County Department of Public Health today. And if you need to follow up with this, just let us know. But based on any feedback you've gotten, do you anticipate that we're going to have to make significant changes to the protocol we've already developed? Or is it just some minor adjustments?
No, I don't think that there will be significant changes. I think right now what we have is the most restrictive model. And I think that as things change or as additional information is provided and as they work through a number of cases, I think you've seen in the medical community that as they've responded, that things have changed as far as the protocols are concerned. So I just expect that it will be based on their experience and what the medical professionals are telling us about how to best respond. At the end of the day, our goal is to prevent the spread of the virus in our school environment as to the greatest extent possible. So they will continue to help us understand what's necessary to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I'm assuming that those people who did leave comments will be, at least I know you provided some of the answers, or at least as much as we can possibly do, but if they can be directed, specifically where to look for that, that would be helpful for them, I'm sure. Next up, we have welcome celebrations and recognitions. Do we have anything for that right now? Okay, then I will move on to our only discussion item, which is the board goals. So I am going to, because Ms. Barker was the one who kind of took that task and did all the writing and codifying of those goals, I'm going to kind of put it in her hands.
Okay, everyone. So I don't know if we want to go ahead and do this. It's just kind of walk through, starting with the first section. And just walk through each one, or if everyone just wants to comment on all of them together, let me know which method you prefer. No preferences, huh?
I would walk through each section.
Okay, section by section.
All right, and I was gonna, if nobody had any thoughts, that was gonna be what I would recommend, just because I think it's probably best for the public, at least since we have a public meeting here, for the public to hear at least what those things are, kind of step by step, rather than a haphazard discussion of the items.
Sure. Okay, so if you want to look under innovative learning, we had our priorities are listed there.
Mm-hmm.
And below that are the goals. So goal number 1 is by January 2021, increase half of the number of K-8 students ready to learn grade level standard-based curriculum as indicated on district-wide assessments, i.e. FastBridge and iReady. Performance gaps presented to the board by October. Expand the rollout of multi-tiered systems of support through 8th grade by October to provide necessary instructional support to reduce the number of students who have performance gaps. And then using both iReady and FastBridge to determine the amount of K-8 students who are ready to learn grade level and then identify the performance gaps by September 30th. So that's number 1, the goal there, and then action steps. Anyone have a thought or want to comment on that?
I want to just say, I think the goals we've set are well done. My concern is the actual target dates, and that we are setting targets without having data first. We are making an assumption that kids will have gaps, and that at some point in time, those gaps need to be filled, which I totally believe we need to do. But we don't know what those gaps are. And to set a January date with a percentage of increase without knowing what our baseline is, seems to me to not be the best method of going forward. I think mapping out what we want in terms of the board would like to see an analysis of the baseline data that comes in, as I assume we'll be able to do in September, as you know, or late August, and bring it to L&T and we discuss it. And then we look at what the gaps are so we can set goals accordingly. So just so you know, that's where I'm coming from in terms of the dates and the timeline, because I am concerned. My first concern is that we get the kids in school safely, that we figure out what needs to be done with for instruction, and that the teachers have time to look at the data and make those decisions. For us to decide now, before we have even kids in the building, on those targets. Any other year might be completely different because we would have had data at the end of the school year to look at. We have nothing to look at now. So,
Well, and I would say, I disagree. I feel like if we don't have a target that we're headed towards, we won't really know what the district or we are doing if we're headed in the right direction. And then what will we measure it against? Additionally, I do believe there is a point to be made about we need to be flexible. We're in uncharted territory. I do agree with that, but I do believe we need to have metrics. We have to have a target to shoot for, and that we remain flexible. I believe we have it on L&T to be talked about. I think either in November or December. I can't recall what we decided, that we would look at these goals again and determine whether they're appropriate goals to have given what we know at the time. We only know so much right now, right? But I do believe we need to have something to head towards.
I would kind of agree with both of you that we do have to have a target because people need something to shoot for. I don't know if I would call it a hard target. And I say that as long as we look and we're making progress toward goals, that's the, because it's very difficult, as Mrs. McCabe said, it's very difficult right now. You don't have baseline data, and this is a problem often even in a regular school year where the baseline data is not available at the right time. Here we just don't have really any realistic data at all. So I think we probably, if we're looking at a percentage, we can say once we get the data, perhaps in that, I imagine it wouldn't be until at least in August L&T meeting, but perhaps beyond. But once we get that data, to understand what percentage or have that target percentage to shoot for from there, so we can get an idea. But I don't know that we can make it a hard target right now. I don't know that that's fair to anyone. Anyone else with thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I would weigh in. I think I like the elements of the measurement and the targets, but I do have concern related to the timeframes to achieve them as well. I think we can maintain some of the targets related to when instructional gaps are going to be identified and things like that. But I think that we should put a placeholder in, would be my recommendation, in terms of when we'll see improvements and so forth. Because I think Mrs. McCabe and Mr. McNally's point, I think that it's hard to know where we're at until probably 30 days into the school year.
So,
okay. Anyone else?
It sounds like we're all in agreement on the goals and the principles in this document here. It's more just timeline and dates that could use some adjusting. Is that correct?
That's
there are a couple.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And maybe not the entire document, at least the first section here.
Yes, right.
Okay. Yeah, I think flexibility is going to be very important as we move into the school year, and collecting that baseline data is going to be important. But again, I think having these goals is, I do like them, but I'm okay with moving some dates around if need be.
Okay, and I think that's, and I just to clarify, Mrs. McCabe, is that sort of what you were saying?
Yes, well, I think we will know a lot more after the kids have been assessed and there's been time to look at that data as well as the assessment tools we're using, because some of these we haven't used before. We have remote learners, we have face-to-face learners. I mean, there's a lot to this, and at this point in time, I don't want us to go down the wrong path by focusing on something that may not be a problem, or we're missing a problem that we should. And I think we just need to have the time to look at the data and analyze it and have that discussion with the district administration and teachers as to how we're going to address it.
Now, what I would, though, to from my standpoint, to be more specific, I would like to put a little more fine target around when the instructional gaps will be identified and presented to the board. I would keep that timeline in, but I would even make it something like the date of the first board meeting in October or something like that.
Performance gaps presented to the board by October. So that would be either October L&T or October board meeting, depending what you guys want. I mean, it's there, all the action steps. Like, so for example, the testing needs to be done by September 30th. Performance gaps are presented to the board by October. And then by January, that there has been an improvement in the amount of students who have gaps.
Yeah, I guess my point as it relates to the October, I appreciate that October's there, but I don't want to wait until the third Monday in October, because basically we've lost another month. So my recommendation would be by the board meeting in October.
Okay. We'll add that.
And maybe through L&T first, Mrs. Fairgrave?
Oh, and at the end of September as an early read, I think that would be fantastic.
Well, I guess we also have to, as part of this discussion, we probably have to add administration. Is that something we can have by then, or is that realistic in your mind? That by the September L&T meeting, which is
23rd, I think, yeah.
I'm sorry, say again?
September 21st.
Yeah, so roughly 2 months from now, would we be able to have that data so that we can kind of set our baseline and determine where we want to go?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I'm comfortable with the goal around identifying instructional gaps and trying to show improvement in student learning. I think that that's a really important target for us. I also don't want to miss the fact that we have highlighted the importance of belonging and connection as we have students return to school in the fall, and the amount of fear and anxiety that people have experienced around this current crisis. And we are asking our staff members to engage in conversations and provide strategies and support for students as they come back to school around those areas, in addition to identifying the instructional gaps. I also want to point out that for many of our staff members, iReady is a new tool. We have been using it for MTSS, and some teachers embraced it in the spring as we went to remote learning, because it provided both assessment and instructional resources, but our staff members are going to be learning how to use it. So it is reasonable to think that by October we will have that preliminary data for you. Today, actually, we had training for our administrators around supporting iReady implementation in our district. And one of the things that they said is it depends by grade level when you do that first assessment. For example, certain grade levels are expected for them to be done within the first couple of weeks of school. Others are 4 weeks after the start of school, especially the younger elementary grades. They recommend a little bit later. So if you want a more comprehensive and complete picture, knowing that that's something that we're working on, I think thinking about, sure, learning and teaching in September would be a nice reach or stretch goal, but realistically, I think by the board meeting in October, we should have all of those preliminary reports back, and it's something that we can share with you. And as we implement together and as we come back to school, I think we can continue to monitor, how things are going and whether or not we've been able to get that information collected. But I think we need just a little bit of flexibility there, I think, to kind of navigate all of the different things.
Does anyone know the board, what's the date of the board meeting in October? I don't have that one in front of me.
No, I don't. It's 1 week before the L&T meeting. I know that.
All right,
Whatever that date is, and now I
find it.
had those up and now I don't have them. So.
I do also want to say before we even go on that Denise Herman, we had a great conversation and she had a great idea about having these goals under innovative learning, having them on each L&T to be able to kind of just update progress. So we'll know if we're getting to where we need to go or if we want to adjust the target of where we're going. We can do that if we're continuing to really have that information brought to us and updated. It's not just set it, forget it.
Right.
So I really did, I appreciated that thought and suggestion.
Yeah, if it's
October regular board meeting in October is the 13th. It's the day after Columbus Day.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I that was something we talked about, it essentially kind of a rolling, we'll discuss this, we'll discuss the next one, the next, and I do like that because it keeps it in the forefront, what it is we're doing. And really that's probably the most important work the district is doing right now. So to keep that in the forefront is probably, well, I think that works out well. So are there any comments?
I have one more question. One of the pieces here, and I'm not sure how you word it, if it's a target, a program, or a goal, is to decrease student absenteeism. And I'm not sure how, I know that's an issue when we were face-to-face, full-time, full blast. Right. And I know that that's a concern that the district took very seriously about being sure that when they went remote, that all kids were accounted for. And so I'm not sure how we're going to do absenteeism as a piece of this work. So I'm just, I don't want to lose it, but I'm not sure it will be as significant.
So you're referring to goal 4, but it's not absenteeism, it's actually student engagement. So by December 2020, collect baseline data on student engagement in remote and in-person learning to set improvement targets for second semester at each level, elementary, middle, and high.
Look on page 1. It's under AIM.
Yeah. Item number 3, programs and services under AIM for priorities short term.
That was a priority that was set at that meeting that we're discussing. So it was one of the priorities that was written down that we were sent the notes from. And it does say decrease student absenteeism, but the goal that ended up being written was on engagement. Again, that whole thing where we really are in that uncharted territory. So Dr. Pearson actually, if you want to talk a little bit about that goal, because originally it was absenteeism, but I felt like this was something you had a really good thought on.
Yeah, so, one of the things that we know is that in a situation like this, where we are encouraging people who are ill to stay home, and we are providing support for students in a remote learning setting, that we don't really probably want to think about just being in-person attendance as the most important element. I think the thing that we want to do as a district, as we find ourselves in this new normal of providing instruction across a variety of modalities, is find a way that's research-based to measure student engagement and how they're working in the different tools that we have available. And Dr. Herman is aware of some and has brought to our team some potential surveys that are nationally normed surveys about student engagement, particularly in online blended or remote learning settings. So there's some national data that we have available that we can compare ourselves to. So I think it would be great for us to get some preliminary information about where our students are, both in an in-person, hybrid, and remote setting, look to see if there's any differences there, because I think that that would be an important consideration. But then also be able to compare our students to national norm data sets. How do we compare to, and we'll have to have the caveat of this norm data is in a typical setting, right? It's not in a COVID-19 setting, but how do we compare to what happens typically in a remote or blended learning setting with student engagement, and then start to unpack as a district what we think the contributing factors are for that. And we may find some successes as well as opportunities for growth, and then be able to set some goals around that. So I think that as a team, we feel very comfortable with starting to collect some data around that student engagement piece, and then identifying some goals and ways that we can think about improving that level of engagement for students.
I would like to note as well that when we had this discussion before, and we were talking about in-person learning, even there were some disparate ways that different districts were apparently collecting attendance or recording attendance. And so we were working before on kind of norming that, and now we've been placed in a different world. So, you know, that's something that, on top of the fact that it's different for everyone, we were having a slight, there was a variation in the way different districts were recording things before as well. So our comparisons may be difficult, I guess is what I'm getting at. Okay, any other comments on that particular item?
Well, can we close the loop though, in terms of, are we going to keep the wording the same on that priority, or should we adjust that so that one of our priorities is still absenteeism, but it isn't necessarily to decrease absenteeism?
Engagement in whatever modality they're in, something like that.
Well, right now, I think that's right now. I think that's one of those items that is a little bit kind of up in the air. Precisely how do you? We don't. You know, when Dr. Pearson had mentioned some research-based norms, are there any? I mean, how could there be any? There hasn't been this situation for very long.
Well, but even putting that piece aside, I think it would be important for us to still at least monitor what our absenteeism is looking like, because that can be a signal or trigger to us for several things, right? Not just engagement. It could also give us potentially some type of indication of the public health in our school district or certain schools. So that's really more where I was getting at least that we're still continuing to monitor it and review it, and then looking for areas of concern.
Yeah, and my only concern in this regard, it's not whether or not we monitor or record, but how we can compare to others in this situation. But no, I agree. We do need to monitor that, and you know, if nothing else, we're establishing our own baseline. So,
is there information that Dr. Pearson that you can provide regarding engagement versus absenteeism, and if we're monitoring absenteeism, it's part of the plan, but we're really looking for that engagement. And can you describe that a little bit so I think everyone can have the same understanding?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of the short-term priority, I think we do want to continue to monitor attendance, both whether our student is attending in a remote setting, so participation in remote learning, or whether they're attending in person. I think that that's still an important piece for us to monitor. To Ms. Fairgreave's point, it will give us other indicators about just health and well-being across our community, and will provide us with students that may need some additional support, either socially, emotionally, physically, or with their instruction. So that is important information. I think we just have to acknowledge that we're facing a school term that's unlike any that we've ever experienced before. So it's hard to predict what's typical. You know, but I think the data will provide us with really good information. But in addition to just participating, which was our standard in the spring, we wanted people to participate. We want them to participate and find that it's helpful or meaningful, right? So that's kind of that next level of engagement where students are going to be providing feedback about how engaging, and teachers are going to be looking at the engagement with their students and supporting their learning. And we're trying some different things with the structure of remote and the structure of the hybrid model. And so just to be able to collect information about how students and staff feel about how those models are being rolled out, I think are going to be important for us as we plan for the future. Because no matter what, we've had blended learning scenarios and courses at our schools, and now we're going to have it widespread across the secondary level in particular in our district. And that's a really good opportunity for us to learn and improve and enhance what learning looks like in those different.
How will we measure attendance on the remote learning days, whether it's 100% remote or the hybrid?
I'm wondering if there's anybody that wants to address that question, either Mr. Shazar or Mr. Moore.
I can answer part of it. So at elementary school, because the students are assigned a single teacher, it's really the same as taking attendance at school. That one's pretty easy. For the other grades, just as we do now, we will in part rely on parents to call their kids in absent. So if you call in your child, then you're marked absent for the day. And if it's a day where this child is in a certain class, then that teacher can also take attendance like they regularly do. But they don't necessarily see every teacher every day.
What about on those remote learning days? Like, would they, go ahead.
Yeah, on days where students are at home remote learning, it's the same. The teacher they see on that day for 612 or teachers can still take attendance as they normally do. Whether it's checking in, you know, if they have a Google Meet with their whole class, they can check in who arrived, or they could have a email conversation with the child, something like that. It's really the attendance for when you're at home is, did you engage in learning that day? So there are a number of different ways to measure that. We will still ask parents to call in students who are not participating that day for whatever reason.
And are you talking about 100% remote scenario or the hybrid schedule for middle school and high school?
I'm talking about the students who are choosing remote now, and if or when we're on fully remote for everybody. So I suppose the rest of your question is on that, if you're an A student, what happens on the B day?
Right.
I think we haven't figured out all of the details of that yet, but part of it will be if the parent is having, or the child is not participating, we'll for sure be asking the parent to call them in.
Okay.
As you do now.
Okay.
More details to come.
Okay, no, we did number 1 and we did number 4. Number 2 is by November 2020, rectify identified mathematics, science, world language, and CTE prerequisite skill deficits for grades 9 through 12. And it includes, the action around that includes creating a plan to determine performance gaps and necessary prerequisite skills for those certain courses that are identified as ones that were needed that maybe they weren't able to get to. And then an assessment of student readiness for the identified courses and tiered support for core courses. And then presenting the performance gaps and prerequisite skill deficits with the plan for rectification to the board at the October Learning and Teaching meeting, although we can make that the October 13th, just kind of do it all in one if we want. And then looking at hiring a director of secondary education with experience as a high school or middle school principal. Thoughts?
I'm going to ask a question that maybe I should know the answer. The courses that we are identified here, is there a reason why those in particular? Are there other courses that we want to know about, or are these just the core courses that we tend to identify?
Well, and I think that's a good question to, the team. The reason originally those were selected, those are courses that may typically have skill sets that the next course builds upon it. That's instead of identifying English, that may be something that is the skill just expands, and they may not need to actually go back and finish the skills that were in the previous course before they can begin the next course of English, for example. So not that English isn't important, it is very important to read and write, but just looking at identifying which courses they really had to have this set of skills as a prereq to the next course.
When I read that was my assumption, is that there's a progression for these courses that, you can't, for example, go to Algebra 2 until you've had Algebra 1. You can't go to, Spanish 2 until you've had Spanish 1. And it's kind of a similar progression with science. So I'm assuming that was the reason those particular courses were selected.
So the major piece here is what did the kids lose in terms of skills they needed to move into the next course? So I'm wondering if we need a broader piece here instead of just a real tight language. I don't know. Dr. Pearson, do you see, I think there will clearly be missing skills that kids are going to need. Have you talked about this already with teachers and departments, or is that part of the conversation that's going on to how to close those those missing links?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of several pieces at play here. So just to speak to this goal in general, I think the intent is understanding that K-8, pre-K-8, we're looking at literacy and math. Those are the two kind of important components. And iReady, we have assessment tools in place that give us good data about where students are in their learning progressions related to those standards and skills. I think at the secondary level, one of the things that we don't have is a comprehensive tool like that that will help us identify some of those gaps. So back in the spring, there were conversations with our teachers and our PLCs and our departments about essential learning standards related to the end of the school year, and they identified those essential standards to ensure that those were covered as part of students finishing the year in the fourth quarter. So there were some preliminary conversations about that. Now, determining whether or not students acquired those skills or can demonstrate proficiency is the next question that we need to answer. That's coupled with the fact that the state is telling us any day now in the next week or two, they are going to share with us what they've identified to be essential standards or learning standards or prioritized learning standards for subjects and courses for this school year. In particular, I think it's connected to what's going to be on state assessments. Is the rationale behind that identification of essential standards. But I think what teachers identified in the spring, the work that they've done this summer on our courses and course planning, combined with the information that we get from the state around essential standards, will help our staff members prioritize what it is that we need to ensure students have as we close that, work to close the achievement gap. And I think, one of the things, I think we've identified some broad categories of courses, and I think they're representative of the classes that do have sequential courses. It's hard to have proficiency in French 3 if you haven't had proficiency in French 2. So we have to know what the pieces are, which I think is the intent of this goal. So what I'm hoping is under kind of this umbrella that we will be identifying specific courses where we feel like those gaps might be present, what the gaps are, and then what our strategies are to close the gap is how I read this goal. And I think that that's appropriate work for our curriculum department and staff to do around ensuring that students have continuity of learning.
Yeah, and I don't, it's a CT. That doesn't mean all of them will necessarily require rectification or anything, So I think it's just doing the, work that Dr. Pearson said, and then, letting us know what was determined and what the plan is going forward.
With regard to CTE, it's rather specific there. It says identified CTE courses, so it's not going to be necessarily all of them. So, is there more discussion on this item? There's actually two parts to this item. So is there more comment or discussion on this?
But we do have that we want a director to be hired.
Yeah, that's the second part I'm talking about. So this is kind of a two-part item. So that before we moved at and started asking questions, I wanted to make sure we were good on what we've discussed so far.
That was already directed towards Dr. Pearson from the board. So that's something that's already been in the works. So
right.
Just plunked in there as part of the action.
Right. Okay. And
then 3 is next. Okay.
So item 3, do you want me to read it or do you want to?
Sure. I'll keep going.
I don't know if you get tired of reading things. So.
Well, if I don't have to say prerequisite again, I'll be really happy. So by March, this is number 3, by March of 2021, 80% of students in grades 2 through 12 who scored an average of 1 to 2.9 on a 5-point scale on the ECRA SEL screener across the 3 domains, responsible decision-making, self-regulation, and social relationships, will demonstrate growth of 1 point from their August 2020 screener score. And this one doesn't have action under it yet, so I think that that's something that they'll have to come up with some action for that one.
Okay.
So we have the same issue that it's too specific before we've done it, before we've actually done the assessment.
Right.
So as long as I'm good with the whole concept of where we need to go and what we need to do, but I really think we shouldn't get.
I think we have, this is data we already have, isn't that correct? That's where
actually, this is a new SEL assessment for us. So we used a different tool last year, and based on feedback from students and staff, there's a tool that's a better tool that gives us better data that we're switching to. And Dr. Pelagi, I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but this will be new baseline data for us.
Now, on this one here, we're actually saying from their August 2020 screener scores. So that's data we don't have yet, but we've anticipated all along we're going to have this in August of 2020. So I know that I mind a hard target on this one because it's something that we've kind of, we knew we were not going to get this data until August of 2020. Is that a fair assessment, Dr. Pearson?
Yeah, so it's a new tool for us and we're giving it right away. And we'll have that preliminary data, and because it's important for us, not only as far as data is concerned, but this gives us really good information about where students are as they come back to school from a social and emotional well-being perspective. Again, we've prioritized as something that's important for us to work on and focus on, especially as students first return to school. And so this will be really important for us to have this information as we start the school year.
Is there any?
So how are you envisioning after you have the screener score in August? When are you going to reassess students? How are you going to measure that you have improved by 1 point?
Yeah, I'm going to let Dr. Pelagi talk about this. I think we give this tool 3 times a year or yes, 3 times.
Yes, it's a benchmark assessment, so we'll give it 3 times a year. We're actually hoping to do the first one within the next week to 10 days so that we can get the information together, kind of organize it and get it out to the buildings so that they have that information before students step foot in the door. What we like about this screener, besides the fact that it's connected to ECRA and that data can then be part of the student's profile, is that it's more aligned with the CASEL competencies, and it comes more from a strengths-based approach so that we can connect kids to those areas where they may already have strengths to build in areas where they may need to have some additional support. So we're excited by the information that it's going to provide to us.
Do you see any issue with the assessment and students being remote? Will there? No?
Yeah, and we'll have to provide some guidance, especially for some of our younger students. I believe, Dave, that what you shared is that it can, the computer can read it to the students, but we know some of our younger friends may need some help from their parents. But regardless, that information is somebody's perception of where that student is at that moment in time, and that information is helpful to us. We're planning to send it out older kids first, middle school, and then our youngest friends last. And so that's our plan for now. And almost all of the structures have some type of a format for them to be done remotely, because that's the environment that students are engaged in across the country in many situations. So.
And with the 80% of students who score at a 1 to 2.9, I'm guessing that's like highly at risk category. Of those students, is it typical that they might grow 1 point, demonstrate a growth of 1 point? Is that because I know that we'll kind of work through that goal, and I said, you know, I'm not familiar with, you know, what's typical growth on that screener, so we need to take a look at that.
And I certainly don't have that answer for our students, since it's the first time that we're using it, and I am not. It's a fairly new screener overall, so what that typical growth looks like, I don't know. I think part of it is we're being ambitious because we know that friends who are coming to us at that level, we're going to be very intentional in the support that we're going to provide to them.
Okay.
And this is one where, you know, as I said, I kind of felt like it was okay to have a harder target because it's something we knew we were going to be starting with. I guess probably this is one where, because it's new, we don't really know what's a realistic growth. This might be something where we're kind of setting our baseline, and we might want to take a look then as data is amassed at other districts to see how we might compare there.
Right. I think the best case scenario is we have no students in that category when they enter our schools in the fall. That would be the best case scenario.
Of course.
And that would be a different problem for us to ponder, but well.
But a better one.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 5 is the last one we need to look at here. It says by March 2021, develop a plan to create a culture that supports equity, diversity, and inclusion for D303 students and staff that reflects our diverse society, and develop skills in appreciating differences, overcoming conflicts, and contributing to society. The action there is hire an equity and social justice administrator and select outside organization to assist the district in completing an equity audit.
Just my thought on this one, I absolutely support the goal. Just from an action standpoint, I guess it felt to me possibly premature to already commit to hiring another administrator prior to actually having the audit done. And then I guess I'm also thinking too, as part of that the consulting organization would provide us with recommendations, whereas, you know, additional staff could be part of that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready to hire someone just yet.
So do we want to put in here if recommended?
I think what we should ask Dr. Pearson is, can we do an audit when we're in hybrid or remote? Because what we want is to really find out where we need to improve and how to improve. And I don't know if if we're capable of getting that information when we're in and out of face-to-face and the structures look different. I would really like to hear from administration where they want to go with this, because I think for us to do our best work, we need to have an audit from an outside organization to give us information.
Yeah, so the way that I read this goal is that we are going to hopefully identify somebody by March to help us do this work. I think realistically, there are several things that, first of all, I want to just reemphasize. As a district, we're committed to understanding the issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion in our district to make sure that we have the right kinds of learning opportunities and experiences for every student and every staff member and every family member in our community. So understanding that, we also know that this is a long-term goal. It's something that's going to take some time to begin to work on, and finding the right partner organization and collecting the right kind of data is going to be important for us to do. It's hard. If I think about where we sit right now as an organization in response to the COVID crisis, I think it would be really challenging to try to complete this work as comprehensively as it needs to be done in the current climate and context. That being said, I would like to continue to talk with organizations about their partnership with us and hopefully bring a recommendation for someone to begin that process with us, understanding that maybe it won't be until next spring, or maybe we're talking to focus groups, or maybe even into next summer, but could they preliminarily collect historical data that we have, or information about different things that have happened in the district in the past. And so it just depends on the components that they use to make that decision as to whether and how far along we think we can get in the process. So for me, I think it's acknowledging that it's an important goal, and then knowing that we want to find someone to help us walk through that equity audit process.
Yeah, I think this one is this year is the beginning of that, to identify who will do that, and then develop a plan to, there's a lot, of course, there's a lot of steps, as you said, but it's about that plan development. This one will run for quite a while.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of subjectivity can be found in this particular goal as well. So we have to be cautious in how we approach this.
Well, I think the part about developing the skills, so now we're really wanting to identify, that plan is about skill developing for our students, and do we have the right tools to do that? Does everyone have the same understanding of what those are? So those are questions that, we would want a plan developed around, but and there's things that we already do that there may be a lot of successes there. We don't know until we have some sort of audit.
Right. No, and as I say, as we progress, there's just this can become a real rabbit hole if we're not somewhat intentional in the way we approach it.
So I apologize if this has already been raised, but did we agree then that we were going to take out the item related to hiring an additional?
I would say, I would say, like, if recommended.
I would, for right now, just take that item out.
Yeah.
And
Is
wait.
that an agreement to that?
Yep.
Yeah, I would
recommend a whole bunch of things that we have to talk about. I don't want to lock us into anything.
I don't either. So it may be recommended, and we may have a discussion later where we say, you know what, we don't agree with the recommendation. And I don't want to be tied into, hey, we said we were going to do this, so now we have to go and spend $100,000 on annual expenditure for something that we may not believe we need at the time. So I think that's something we can look at later. I think for my part, looking at this is one step. The action right now really should be to determine what the needs are, and later to determine how we might fulfill those needs. But that's my own view.
No, I agree, Ed.
So
I think if by the springtime we have identified an organization or a network or partnership can lead us through an audit or take us through an audit, even if it starts in the, as Dr. Pearson said, in the summer or next fall. I think we will have made a major step. We're in unprecedented times, and to try to do anything now would just not be worth the money.
No, I don't want to commit us to money we may later not think is a worthy expenditure. So.
All right, guys, we made it through innovative learning. So
Okay.
if you would take a look at that. Yay.
All right.
Responsible stewardship.
Okay.
And we've got 3 goals there. By October, the first one is by October of 2020, create a COVID contingency budget of $1 million for the unanticipated needs of health, educational, and safety updates. Action items, report to the Board of Education, monitored spending, track savings and expenditures, along with reflection of full budget impact related to COVID-19. Report to the Board of Education a financial analysis of the optimal level of school board fund balances during this recession. Stop.
Okay, well, yeah, why don't we stop there, because that's a mouthful. First of all, does anybody have any comments on this? I have a thought or two.
Just a quick question. Where did the 1 million come from?
Sounded like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's one of the questions I had, was the amount appropriate that we had there originally? So I don't know if Dr. Pearson, you want to talk about the amount?
Yeah, so this is really going to be a good discussion for business services on Wednesday, because as we talk about the budget, we have identified a contingency line in the budget. That's actually something that you can put in a budget any year that you want to, and we don't typically use the contingency line, but given the changing context of COVID and how we've had to respond to that, we think that it's important. I think some boards have set it at 1%, which for us would be about $2.1 million if you look at the total budget. Some boards have said, this is about 1% or a little less than 1%. So I think that we just put $1 million there as a talking point. We also know that we've already done some things that are included in the budget, and you're going to kind of see an update on Monday of things that we've already done as we prepare for the school year. So this line would be for unanticipated expenses that we haven't addressed thus far. So the number is, you can tell us really what you want it to be, and I think if you want to think about it and give us some guidance for the budget conversation on Wednesday, that will be helpful. It helps us to have that in the budget, knowing that we're going to spend some money based on responding to the health crisis on things that we haven't planned.
Yeah, I think I was just curious where the number came from, so appreciate the explanation.
Yeah, I think I originally had I think I had 1% because I had looked at something another board was doing, and it just, I didn't know if that just seemed, is it arbitrary? What seems more reasonable? So I kind of threw it back at Dr. Pearson to come up with a talking point. Is everything else? Anyone else have any comments about that one? We're good to move on.
No, I think that was really kind of, I said I had 1 or 2 things to say, but that was the one thing is, we don't have any idea right now because they're unanticipated, we don't know. And so I think I heard 1 million was a big number, and it is. Is that going to be enough though for what is unanticipated? And I know there are certain things we're doing right now just kind of as part of our regular budget. So do you, it kind of, as we enter that discussion on Wednesday, Dr. Pearson, do you think that is an adequate number? Do you anticipate that might be more might be needed? And maybe that's a Chapman question, but
yeah, Dr. Chapman's here, and he and I have had this conversation. It's a guess. We're guessing. I mean, again, it's because there's already been expenses that we've incurred related to COVID, including staffing expenses, which we've talked about, and those are all included in the budget already in other line items. So they're not in this necessarily contingency portion. This is for things we haven't planned for. So part of our meeting on Wednesday, you're going to see everything we're tracking COVID-19 expenses. So you're going to see a table with that information, and you'll kind of start to see the kinds of things that we're having to spend money on that might not be typical year expenses. And I think that will help guide this conversation. I think from a budgeting standpoint, this number seems right based on kind of what we know right now, but it's just we're guessing. It's an educated guess would be what I would say. Dr. Chapman, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just from a technical perspective, you're also allowed a 10% overage in any function code line item in the budget. So not to mention, you're also allowed to amend your budget during the year at any time. So I think that between those two factors and the factor that we feel like $1 million is about the right number, you should be fine. But to Dr. Pearson's point, if you want to change the number, that's not a problem either. What we do is we just put an offsetting number on the revenue side, because the fact of the matter is we could also get in a situation where additional grants become available. We already have applied for FEMA grants, so we don't want that to impact the way the budget looks structurally.
That was part 2 of my question, really.
Yeah.
What was this an item that's being put in because there's potential grants or relief from the state? And that's why I'm wondering about the size of it. Would it be advisable? And I don't even know if it's anything that needs to be, we need to be concerned about, but would it be advisable to make the number larger if that's the budget item that the state might be looking at for providing relief at some future point?
Yeah. And we don't really know what those numbers look like for future grants or things like that. There's been a lot of things talked about both federally and at the state level, but again, we'd be making an educated guess.
Okay. All right. Well, anybody else? I think we can move on to the next item.
Next one. We've already been kind of talking about this. Set a fund balance with newly set parameters based on current economics. We are currently at 46%, and our policy is 28 to 34%. So action with that is presenting options to the board on reductions of the fund balance with parameter and maybe new or different parameters and specifics by March 1st of 2021.
My only comment to that, and thank you for clarifying, because it didn't really state that in the action, but I would want the board to have an initial conversation to determine if the policy and the fund balance range still makes sense given the current environment and the recession that we're in. So that would just be my only add to that.
And when do you think that conversation should take place? Any thoughts about that?
We talked, it got brought up, I want to say about 4 months ago. And then obviously COVID hit. We were talking about putting that on an agenda as an agenda item at business services. So I think we can get it on maybe not this month, but maybe September or October to have a discussion about what we think the fund balance should be in these economic conditions.
Yeah, I would throw out there perhaps maybe at the November meeting or early December. I mean, Dr. Chapman, what do you think? And the only reason I say that, Mr. Bryant, is I just would like to see more of the school year play out and see what our expenses look like, investments that we've had to make before we decide to do something different with the existing fund balance.
On that,
the only thing I would jump in and say real quick is if you're trying to time it at a period of time when there are less agenda items for business services, August and then the November, December are the two. So once we get to September, now we're talking tax levy. So September, October tend to get pretty busy. Mr. Baird's got 5-year cap stuff that comes along. So August or November, December would be good.
For my part, I might say that it's maybe better to put it off because of the uncertainty right now. You know, if we had this discussion, we decided we wanted to lower that number, and then we're hit with expenses and things we didn't anticipate, we might regret that decision.
Right.
Okay, what about this? What about having the discussion in February after we have received our facilities utilization plan? We'll also have that to kind of gauge where we want to have the policy along with the economics, along with the uncertainty pieces.
Yeah. I imagine the facilities utilization plan might include some items that would help us reduce that fund balance as well. So
maybe.
So
February a busy time, Dr. Chapman?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Is February an okay time to put that on?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly make that work. Yeah.
okay. When do you think it would be best from your perspective? You were talking about November, December. Is February waiting too long, or is that timeline okay?
No, I don't think it really matters. I mean, I think as long as, I think it's nice to couple it with your other strategic planning discussions, because that's really kind of what it fits into. It's, you know, where are you at
Right.
philosophically with those kind of decisions. I don't think that there's a huge tie into that. It doesn't necessarily need to be tied to your facility master plan. It doesn't need to be tied to budget or anything like that. I think you've got the flexibility to put it wherever it fits for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful when we are discussing this, that, you know, spending down the fund balance and what we set our policy are completely different. You know, policy is long-term. What we talk about for, you know, if we do decide to change policy, you know, that is much different than saying, hey, we need to spend down our fund balance. So tying it to any facilities plan, I don't know if that's the best course of action for us.
Well, there's two parts to this. There is a spend down piece because we are outside of policy right now.
Right.
And then there's also, let's have a discussion about policy. So does the policy conversation need to run through policy?
Well, I guess I would say, I think initially it needs to run through business services to determine if it's something that we even have the appetite to do. And then if we do, then I guess I would imagine it goes through policy. Although historically we have put some policy discussions in specific committees versus policy committee, depending on what it is. And my other comment too, to Mr. Bryant's point, again, I would reiterate, I would like to have a discussion about our parameters today and whether we think that those still make sense for the long term, which economically is, you know, they're anticipated this will be a couple of years at least to come out of this economic cycle. And then if the determination is those parameters for the fund balance still make sense, then we have another conversation where we look at our strategies and determine how to pull down the fund balance.
Right. So there's two things happening.
To clarify, I was not suggesting that we tie the fund balance policy discussion to, it's just pointing out that shortly after that November, December timeline we were talking about, we were going to be going into having that facilities master plan. And those are the kinds of things that are tied into fund balance. So might help to educate us a little bit on where a fund balance might sit, having all that information. Because we can have a fund balance discussion and we can change a policy this year and 2 years from now determine that, you know what, we decided we want to up that or lower that again.
Right.
One other thing I would add is we actually have 3 policy items that we've kind of tabled for discussion until we get back in person that are business related. And I believe we made the change. I don't know if it was a year ago, but I think policy committee is only meeting once or twice a year with really large discussions. And then we have put those into committee. So you want to take it to business services, and we can do that whenever you'd like.
So what I would propose then is at our December Business Services meeting that we have an agenda item where we talk about the parameters of the fund balance.
You want to say December?
Yeah.
Okay. That works for me. I'm one, I was kind of, when I learned we had a 46% fund balance currently, I was a little surprised because that was so far outside the parameters, and given that the expenditures we've had over the last couple of years, I was a bit surprised. But so I'm sooner. That's why I was kind of asking if it might be too late to wait till February. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter as long as we have the discussion. I think people just don't like to see tax dollars tied up and sitting in a fund balance, not really doing anything.
And then so the second part of that is that it's separate. It's about getting back to whatever we decide the policy parameters.
Right. And so, and those that's what we're talking about is that we want to be determine what that number is. And is it 28 to 34, or do we want something lower? Do we want something higher? I'm going to say probably not, but that's getting into that discussion. So I don't want to get into that yet.
Well, and I want to make sure that I understand what your objective is. So what I'm hearing right now is that you want to have a policy discussion in December at Business Services about whether or not the policy we currently have is the right policy. But then based on that discussion, then you're going to want us to come back at a later point with some discussion about, okay, now what are we going to do about it? If you decide you want it to be a lower number, then what would you like to do, and what are some of the options around addressing that, the difference between where you set the fund balance ceiling and where we are now? Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, are we ready for number 3?
As far as I can see, nobody else has any. I can't see everybody on my screen, but I think we're good.
Okay, number 3, by August 12th, 2020, prepare all facilities to be utilized for a transition to in-person learning with required safety precautions in place per ISB, IDPH, and the Board of Education recommendations and approval. An action is to create a plan in line with the contingency budget and present this plan to the Board of Education for approval prior to the start of the 2021 school year.
I got muted. Sorry about that. Anyone's thoughts on this matter?
So I guess, can I just chime in on a couple things? One is, I'm not sure that necessarily what's going to be shared is going to be in line with the contingency budget. The contingency budget would be unexpected expenditures related to COVID-19. And I don't know that we're going to know necessarily by August the 12th what our unexpected expenditures are. And then I guess the question is about the approval. Are you wanting to approve the expenditures? Is that what you're looking to approve? Because that would be when you approve the budget at the August meeting. Or are you wanting to approve the IDPH guidelines and safety plan that we have? I'm not clear here what it is you would like us to bring forward.
So I think there's the piece with this one is presenting the plan, which, I mean, maybe this one isn't entirely necessary because it's sort of, I guess it's more repetitive with the first one with the contingency budget, and this is more of preparing all facilities, and maybe it's more of an action and less of a goal. I don't know what others their thought is behind that.
It seems to me that it is always our goal to have facilities ready for kids by the first day of school. And that's just how we operate. It shouldn't be a goal. It's standard acting or standard practice.
When did we first discuss this item?
I don't remember this at all.
And I vaguely recall a discussion about this, and I think that was when we were maybe a bit more hopeful about that potentially being the case.
Yeah, I mean, number 3, look at the short-term priorities. Somebody said it, or more than one person said it, because it got written down as one of the things that was captured, which made me believe that it was more than one person, as I recall. It says that buildings with health and safety measures to reopen according to state and local health authority guidance. So that one was really just made off of that priority in respect to the priority that was discussed.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we have to understand that we're talking about guidance from that today and tomorrow are different. So I don't know how how hard and fast this one can really be.
Maybe it's worth eliminating this one because, per our last board meeting, we did take some of those steps as a board to approve some of those measures, particular to the bathrooms and drinking fountains and things like that. So I think we are taking those steps. So maybe we don't need them because it's already kind of in action.
And we can't know, I guess we're asking people to shoot at a target that's moving right now. And that's part of the reason we have a contingency budget. So approving expenses on a contingency budget before we know what the contingencies are just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
So I think, why don't I kind of morph this into underneath action under that first goal? It's in process right now, so we know that, but respect to that priority that those, I know I wasn't talking about that one, but there was a discussion about it. So it just,
and I
action.
I remember what the discussion was. I just know that I kind of vaguely recall the discussion, and it was one of those things that I think we kind of said at the time, even that we're talking about trying to comply with organizations that aren't sure what they're doing right now either.
I mean, our expectation is that we're going to follow whatever ISB and the Department of Health are saying, and I think that's been what the work has been all along this summer. To assume it isn't ready is, I mean, I don't know that it's really a goal. It was an expectation that, of course, every school district is under. So I don't know that it needs to be a goal unless we think we have to continue to say, who knows what December is going to look like, and we have to change again. But I think that's the expectation of the work involved, is to follow all the guidelines.
We're trying to hit a cloud with an arrow right now, and we can't do it.
Okay, so I'm going to take that one. It won't be a goal. I'll just kind of morph it into the action that's under the first one. And we know that, yes, it's something that is an expectation every year, but sometimes goals can include action that's just expected too. So we can, I'll take that one out. Okay, we're ready for quality staff.
Okay, I am ready.
All right. Number 1, improve the internal organizational culture by focusing on strategies that strengthen the communication and collaboration environment between administration and staff.
I have to say that the value paragraph that's written, I really think is well done. What confuses me is that number 1 doesn't have really a lot to do with what the value says. This is really more about communication and between administration and staff. So I'm not sure that I would say this is the right goal for what we really value. We may need communication. We may need to have make sure culture and climate are strong, but it really doesn't go with making sure instructional work is being done and supporting teachers to do the kind of work. So that is where I got a little confused on this one.
Well,
I actually,
yeah.
I was going to say, I actually looked at that a little bit differently, and I felt to motivate and ensure we have staff that are passionate about their roles, the environment that they're in, that this communication piece is critical. So that's where I saw that fitting in.
I'm all for good communication. I'm just saying that really doesn't fit in with the designing and providing day-to-day learning experience. That's
well,
all.
I think there probably needs to be more than one goal here.
More than one goal or more than one action?
Well, more than one goal, because the first one really focuses on the internal culture of communication and collaboration between staff and administration. And they're really, I guess, to your point, Mrs. McCabe, I don't think number one addresses that piece that you talked about related to designing and day-to-day learning experiences. So I think there needs to be an additional goal.
Yeah, it is. So the goal, it really could go under community relations because it kind of bounces back. I do, Heidi, as you had said, to have staff that are passionate about their calling, etc., and so on. As you go down that sentence, you do need to have good relationships and have a positive climate in your buildings. So kind of back and forth on where to put it. Otherwise, there wasn't anything under quality staff that was identified as a priority when we did set the priorities. So I'm fine to move it into community relations because it's about stakeholders, but it doesn't fit under that value real well either.
Well, I think it would be kind of, as far as an action, finding a way to, and I don't know precisely what that would be, but to support the work of the teachers and things like continuing education and things like that, that actually relate to providing day-to-day learning experiences for students. Do we do a good enough job of that? And I'm not saying one way or the other. I think that's kind of, if we're going to address that value, then the action, I think, has to be something to support that value. And that's just kind of off the top of my head. One of the things that comes to mind is, are we providing the adequate support for training and perhaps outside training?
Professional learning, hiring practices, supporting teachers as they go through all the assessment data to have to change instruction. All of those pieces to me fit into more what a quality staff goal is. I get the need to have open communication. I just think, I'm not sure it's reaching what we value. So maybe we need to rework it a little bit before we vote on, or before we sign off on it.
Right, and even as the value, I kind of think, as I read between the lines, that we're kind of trying to say we want to have a, for lack of a better term, a happy staff, but a staff that feels supported. Is that kind of what people's thoughts are on this particular one?
Well, and I think satisfied in their role, and they have a feeling of accomplishment in what
Right.
they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's why, for me, I would go back to, I think it's fine in this section, the goal number one. I would just add, I don't know the number of goals, but to speak to some of the things that you talked about, Ed, and Becky as well, I would just add additional goals to address those elements.
Mm-hmm.
That's my
I think support.
Is it possible for us to do a little more tweaking on this and bring it back?
do we want to bring it, how soon? Do we want to bring it back? Are we looking?
I'm happy to help work on it. I think there are components here about a staff that's satisfied when if we're looking at short term. And I think I think there are probably areas here that we should talk about to be sure that we know that our staff is getting the support. We all know that nationally, teachers are very concerned right now. So what's the board's need in order to make sure that quality instruction is going on in an era where we're really unsure of what is going to happen?
Yeah, when you say that, it probably kind of crystallizes a little for me as well, because I was kind of thinking in more broad terms about staff, but really in the current environment, if we're talking about a short-term goal, the current environment is probably what we have to look at, because that's where their concerns are right now.
But their concerns will also be about instruction. And so
right.
I think this needs more work. So if there's any way we could just at least work on it before the next board meeting, I'd be happy to help with that wording.
I would be able to do that as well, because I do think this particular one is one that I kind of look at and think there is something short term. There's something a little broad. It's still short term, but a bit more broad than what we're talking about here, in kind of focused on the current environment that we're all in.
Dr. Pearson, do you have any thoughts in particular on this?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we really are working on right now. It's been a tremendous effort on the part of staff and the learning and teaching department as well, to try to support teachers with professional learning to respond to the kind of the changing educational landscape. Everything's moving right now. But I also, as you think about kind of climate and culture, I think that a lot of what's happening around us systemically in our school districts, and also as we respond to the COVID crisis, is creating a lot of anxiety for people as well. And so I think that that's going to be represented in any kind of information or data that we collect around that. So I think it would be important to capture what are the systems and structures that we're putting in place to help teachers be as equipped and as comfortable with the responsibilities that they have around supporting student learning in this changing education landscape. So I think I agree, based on the value that you've represented, I think that that's probably a more important goal in the short term, is putting those systems and structures in place. And then at a later point, maybe we measure the efficacy and the kind of attitudes about it.
Right.
Okay.
So definitely be reworked. There's some other pieces that need to be shuffled anyway too, or things added to in the other goals too. So all right, ready to go to community relations?
I think so. I think that's one that we're going to kind of table and discuss a bit more. So, and we can have a discussion about when that's going to happen later. So let's go there.
All right. Okay, so community relations, goal number 1, by December 2020, reevaluate and propose an updated communication connection strategy between the Board of Education, D303, and the public, including but not limited to print, email, in-person, and social media regarding COVID and facilities utilization. That one might need some wordsmithing, but.
My initial thought on that one was, I was curious as to why we limited it to COVID and facilities utilization. I think that there's probably an opportunity to fine tune our strategy just across the board in general.
As I read this, I was reading it and thinking, this is something we've spent a lot of time discussing over the last year and a half to begin with. And then when I got to the COVID and facilities utilization. I said, okay, well, that kind of explains why this item is here at the moment.
Right, kind of trying to make it short term, but you know, if we want, if it's long term, if we want to have an updated communication strategy, you know, that's a good idea too.
Well, I think you've in essence made it short term by the target of December 1st, or you know, wherever that lands. So to me, I think you're already doing that by the date.
Yeah.
Go ahead. There are a couple things here, and we clearly, the district was inundated with an enormous amount of let's talk and board letters and comments. And I think part of what we're going to have to do is decide what part worked really well. What do we want to keep if we ever get out of this situation? What do we want to keep? Where do we need to support our communications department? Do we need to give more people more time? I wish I could give you more time. I'm only limited to 24 hours. But is there some, so I think a conversation about this, to be really frank about it, I don't want a plan that has been developed by taking because our people are busy. I don't think we need another, my guess is there's a lot of review going on after every situation happens, and that conversation happens. I think a conversation needs to happen as to how can the board support communication in a crisis situation. And if we need to offer more resources to make that work, I think that's a good thing for the board to consider. But I don't want a huge presentation that Mrs. Smith has put together just to meet a goal of ours that's on paper. I would really rather have a strong conversation about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what is needed. And I don't know if I'm being really clear, but we need her to be on ready for whatever's coming forth ahead of time. And I don't want her to spend time doing a presentation for us.
Well, and I guess my thought to that is those items that you talked about, Becky, I think are very important, and I would hope those would be considered and included in the plan.
Mm-hmm. I think that I think what you said is important. I think that, you know, we're a fairly large district, and after analyzing how things have gone, and you know, 600, what was it, 690 dialogues, in just this short amount of time, you know, and you know, the concern about getting information out and things like that, you know, is that department supported enough? I don't know, and maybe there needs to be analysis, and then from there a plan of what's needed going forward. I think that's what this goal is trying to get to, is that, yes, I don't like giving people busy work, but if we don't know what the analysis is and what the desired plan is, it's hard to support.
Well, I think that as I kind of, you know, again, read through the between the lines, based on what I've heard from the public and what I'm seeing here as part of this goal, I think really we have to answer the question, is it so much a question of how we're going to communicate as opposed to what we're going to communicate? Because I think that's where some of the questions are. There are questions that come from the public about things that we have not necessarily communicated, and in some cases we can't. And so I think that, for my part, I think that that's kind of a question we have to answer as far as this is concerned. Is it a matter of how we communicate? Because I think we've spent the last 1.5 to 2 years discussing and coming up with different ways with different hows. And I think if a communication gap still exists, I think it might be some of the what is communicated.
To that point, this is what we have offered to families are choices.
Right.
And I don't believe we've ever done that before as a school district. You have some choice now as to how your child will be educated.
Right.
And because of that, families are working really hard to make a decision that is really important. I mean, it's probably one of the most important decisions they will make. And so there's a delay on answers because there is a delay on answers.
Yeah, there's a delay on answers to them because there's a delay on answers to the district.
Right. And it all could change in an announcement from the governor. And, that can always happen as well.
That was the big rumor Friday, that Friday there was the rumor that he was going to come and announce everything was going to be online. That was a rumor that I had heard and was dispelled, fortunately. But so again, that's kind of the what. And when I say the what's communicated, again, there are certain things that we cannot communicate, not because we don't want to, but we don't have the information. And maybe some of the what that needs to be communicated is this is why we can't tell you this, because we don't know. And these are the things that we aren't going to know. I think that's where some of the gap falls, some of the things fall into that gap is the things we don't know or the things we're unable to communicate. If people don't know that we're not, they think automatically we're withholding information, but we're not doing that. We just don't know it yet.
I guess from my point of view, I don't want a lot of time spent because I think communications needs to be ready to operate, 24/7, because you never know when that crisis is going to happen. And my gut tells me that is a conversation that Dr. Pearson has with his team on a very regular basis. How do we prepare? What do we need to do? And maybe the board needs to hear the pros and cons of what has happened, maybe later, but I would like as a board member to be able to support our communications so that we are doing the best we can and that we are giving the resources to our folks so they can do their best. So that's where I'm coming from. I hate to put a real specific target on something where it may need to be done tomorrow. I don't know. That's where I'm at right now.
Well, and I think that by just doing it by December or within December, having analyzed, it's not at the beginning of the school year when things are going to be very busy. It's, afterwards, maybe after some dust settles that, Ms. Smith would be able to give us, that analysis and strategy going forward, that included the need of her department. And I did hear, and I don't know if we agreed that, do we want it to be fine tuning kind of everything, or is it really with the lens of the two things that are, big things this year?
Well, I guess that's where I'm kind of struggling with this goal, because I don't know really. We've kind of said within the goal itself, print, email, in-person, social media. Those are all things that we've kind of, we've been kind of on, and we added a citizens panel as well. I think the how of communications is mostly, I think, addressed. I think now it's a matter of what are we telling people?
Well, but I guess, and I would go back to, if we're talking about, are we supporting communications to the best of our abilities as a board. That could include additional resources. I don't know how you do that under just a COVID and facilities utilization lens, which is why I would go back to, I think it's a matter of evaluating the strategy that we have and creating a proposal around what actually might be needed to address all of these different mediums.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Okay, so I'll take off COVID and facilities and kind of just add some pieces that I heard in there. And make sure that that makes a little more sense to what our discussion has been here.
Now, the question I did have was, could you talk a little bit more around the BOE liaison for public relations and what that is?
So that really is looking at supporting the department, is particularly potentially having, you know, additional members in that department who might have a different, you know, whomever might have a focus. Obviously, I would want it to be proposed in a way that made sense for that department, but potentially one of those would be, you know, working with the board, and that is, or the board and the superintendent, and kind of doing that PR for those, that group. And then there's, you know, it could be divvied out differently, but just making sure that the board isn't forgotten in there.
Okay, so this is a person on the communications team fulfills that?
Yeah, so that might be something that person would do.
Dr. Pearson, can you weigh in on this in terms of being able to reflect on where we are right now and what you might need for the opening of school, and to help us guide what we should be really proposing and how we can support?
So I'm okay with coming back with some kind of plan and proposal. I think that that's important. I think if I think about, and this is my 11th year in the district, and I don't know that we've changed the structure of our communications process since I've been here. We've changed people, but we haven't maybe necessarily changed the structure. And we may or may not, I mean, we've added some strategies, but I don't know that we have in a comprehensive way evaluated the strategies that we're using. And clearly the landscape has changed, right? And so we're also in the middle of a crisis right now. So we are in a crisis management mode, and that's a different kind of communication from like a day-to-day school district communication strategy. So acknowledging that, it would not hurt for us to have some conversations about whether or not we have the right structure and resources in place, by looking at what other districts our size are doing, what kinds of tools they're using, and we have access to some of that information, but I don't know we've done that analysis. So I certainly think that it's an area that we can improve, you know, and I'd like us to be able to have a more comprehensive look. And quite frankly, I would rather it not necessarily be on the COVID lens. The COVID lens is really unique, and we're doing what we can do in that context. But I think from a broader perspective, what can and should we be doing as a district team in the area of communications is something that I think would be important for us to look at. So I'm okay with bringing back the plan. I'm hopeful December 1st is the right deadline for that. We'll have to have an internal conversation about what it looks like. But if it's just really about a strategy and maybe a recommendation for a structure and plan going forward, that should be something that we can do. And then looking at the second goal, I think that speaks to kind of the immediate need, which is the facility utilization.
So instead of us having action with specific things, you would bring to us a proposal that we can then decipher what we need to support, correct?
Right. I mean, there may be other things in there. I think these are things that the board thinks might be important, but there may be other things that we discover that we want to include as part of the plan.
I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I think, if we are putting together a plan on what we need, I think this would be a great opportunity for us to take the temperature of the community and find out how they want us to communicate as well. So I don't know if that can be a piece of this also. I think that is important. That's who we are communicating with.
Mr. McKay, go ahead.
However, you see CAC being able to support some of that work too. I know you'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, that to me, again, that's one of the things we've done with the how of communication. And so certainly that's something that we have to make sure we're constantly updating. I don't want to spend a lot of time on something that we've already spent a lot of time on. If there's a communication gap, we need to determine what that is and fill the gap. But we've had a lot of discussion about the how of communication over a long period of time. And I think at this point, if there are people that are not being communicated with, perhaps they don't want to be, because we've provided all kinds of different outlets for communications. So if there are some, I think, more specific things, those are the things I think we need to look at and address.
But Mr. McNally, to Mr. Bryan's point, that my first year in the district, this is now my 4th year in the district, we did a communications survey and asked parents how, where they get their information, how they want to get their information. So it might not be a bad idea to do something like that. And then we would have some baseline data to compare it to.
Okay. No, I'm not objecting to it. I just don't want to, I don't want to constantly rehash the same point when we're really, that's not the business that we're to communicate the business that we're in, which is education. So I don't want to take away from that in order to have more of a discussion about how we're going to discuss things.
I can appreciate that.
So I think, okay, so I've got some feedback here, can get this a little more tuned up. And then the second one, did anyone have any comments about that one? Engage all stakeholders in the process of the facilities utilization plan and COVID restructuring. And part of that with the task forces, with the COVID piece is really partly been accomplished.
Yeah, and I think as far as focus groups and things like that, those are more difficult right now too.
Well, we've been having, the CAC has been, in the meeting, and we'll meet on the 29th. Right. It's something we can still do virtually like we did, very successful.
Yeah, I guess that, I'm thinking back to when we've done these big community, engagement where we've been at the school, and we can't do that. And I think in a virtual environment, that's a little more difficult to get big feedback. And I would like to get that from people. So there is an area where I do wonder, how do we get the feedback from the community other than the avenues we've already utilized?
Although I will say, Ed, to that point, I believe it's Algonquin. There is a neighboring district that they are doing virtual town halls with each of their schools to address a lot of these types of things. So that's just one example of how we can perhaps do some things that we wouldn't normally have done.
Right. No, I appreciate that. That's kind of my point, is that I want to make sure that those virtual town halls are going to, as best as possible, capture the same kind of information and temperature of the community that we would in those groups that we had where we held them at schools themselves in person.
I also think that when we go face to face in August, are we going to still take comments online? Or are we going to go back to, you have to be in person? So I think there are those kinds of questions that our community, our last board meeting had over 1,600 people watching. I think that speaks highly for our community and their passion for our school district and their students getting the best education. So I think we have those kinds of issues to consider. We will be streaming because we were doing that before COVID, but
Right.
there are little pieces. And does it work? Is it the right thing for us to do? We had quite a few comments and it took a half an hour, and then we got yelled at by somebody because it took too long. So I think those are the kinds of things too that we have to decide as a board.
Right.
Okay, so bringing these back, when is our next board meeting? I don't have those dates in front of me still.
I think the next board meeting is August 10th. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And then the next L&T meeting would be August 17th, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. So August 10th. So that's the next board meeting. And we do have a couple of these items that we need to kind of maybe work on, tweak a little bit before then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they'll get tweaked and resent out before August 10th. Is that when we're gonna look at them?
As long before August 10th as as much lead time as possible, because if they're tweaked, they might need to be retweaked. So if we want to do
get one tweaking, that's it.
that's the limit. No, I think that if we kind of try to incorporate those things and get those things out to board members as quickly as possible so that they can look at it and say, yeah, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant. I think that's so obviously the sooner the better, but I'm not the one that's necessary. As I say, I'm volunteering to assist, but I'm not the one that's necessarily putting pen to paper. So that's the secretary of the board doing that. Who's that again? I don't want to overburden you, is I guess what I'm saying as well.
Sure. I want to have a conversation with Dr. Pearson about the tweaks that we've recommended, so that we make sure that we have, because I'm sure Dr. Pearson will have some time to, think about those things and maybe be able to kind of put it together. And then from there, if I need help, then I have two people who have volunteered so kindly.
Don't forget Mrs. McCabe.
Yeah, as I say, two people. Wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
So timeline, what do you think? Do you think you can get it to us by August 1st? Or is that?
Yeah, it'll have to be, because I'll be out of town from the 2nd through the 7th. So.
Okay.
So she really means only time for one tweak.
After that, somebody else is going to have to type it.
No, I'm sure that I think you've been taking, you're kind of repeating back to us some of the things we said. So I think it will probably work out fine. So
yeah, I think I have it. And if there's something that I missed, then we can always fix them and then get a final out in between. So yeah, so before August 1st.
Okay.
All right, got it.
Okay. All right. Well, that is that was our discussion item for tonight. For future agenda items, first of all, our next meeting will be on August 17th. And for future agenda items, Dr. Herman, do you have a list of those as yet? Or I know we kind of discussed and I couldn't remember what all went where.
We talked about having the early learning, early childhood plan, an update for the August meeting. And then we also thought that we would have an overview of the return to learn in the data, what percentage of students selected which model, how the schedule, just again, a report since school will be starting that week. So those are the two right now, but we can add any other things that the board members would like to discuss.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. Since we're sending out the guide to reopening schools a little bit later than originally thought, when will we have an opportunity to ask questions about that?
So certainly you can have an opportunity to send us questions if you have them. We could talk about it a little bit at Business Services on Wednesday if you want to, as part of the COVID. Is COVID update on the agenda? Yeah, as part of the COVID update.
I think all the have that now, right? Yeah, COVID update at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I just remember that this document, especially the learning structures, are supposed to be jointly developed with the association and the administration. And so that's where this is coming from our instructional team. That's the plan that's been put together following those guidelines, which came from the state.
Okay. All right. So for right now, it looks like those are our two items. And I think there's going to probably be some discussion about some of those, about those two items as it is. So if there is anything else, obviously people can contact me, Dr. Herman, or Sparker, and ask that something be discussed for that agenda. I think we are done for tonight, and so unless anybody has anything further, I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 7:36 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.